Hello, and welcome to Canyon Professional Development. I'm excited to be here with you for this session focused on differentiated instruction, enhancing lesson design to meet the needs of all students. My name is Carolyn Flora, and I'm the K-12 Project Director. I have over 25 years in education. To start off, I'd like to share a quote with you by Howard Gardner, who is a guru of differentiated instruction. This quote states, "The biggest mistake in past centuries in teaching has been to treat all children as if they were variants of the same individual, and thus feel justified in teaching them the same subjects in the same ways." As you think about your instruction, how do you relate to this quote? Do you feel that you have moved beyond treating all children as variants of the same individual? Or are you still utilizing a few one-size-fits-all techniques in your classroom? If so, I hope that today, throughout our session, you will be able to pick up some tips and tricks and strategies that you'll be able to utilize to vary instruction to meet the needs of all students. During this session, we're going to evaluate the benefits of differentiated instruction and the impact it can have on student success. We're going to identify some research-based strategies and resources that will effectively differentiate instruction. And we're going to reflect on strategies and tools that you can utilize in the classroom to immediately meet the needs of all students. I want you to be thinking during this session, what will you take away? As we know, when we head to professional development sessions, if we don't turn around and use some of our new knowledge immediately, we tend to forget. So be thinking, what are you going to take away and what are you going to try right away? Let's start off by taking a look at these three pictures. What do these things have in common? Now, you don't have to write your answer in the chat because we're not synchronous. However, if you are working with others, stop the video for a second and share. What do these three things have in common? Well, as we look at them, they all serve as some type of accommodation. We have the cut curb, which we know accommodates all sorts of things from wheelchairs to strollers. We have automatic doors that can help with a variety of different issues and helping people successfully get into a building. And the last one we have is closed captioning. All of you might be thinking of something in particular and how these can be used to support the needs of students with perhaps disabilities. I want you to think of this through a different lens. I want you to think about how people who aren't necessarily impacted by a disability also benefit from these different accommodations. For example, I mentioned a stroller. As a mom, I know that these cut curbs weren't necessarily made for moms pushing strollers. However, they make your life a lot easier. I was always able to navigate up the curb easily with my heavy stroller. Closed captioning, I can hear the TV just fine. However, there are times when other people in my household might be working on something and they might want the TV muted. However, the rest of us are still able to know what's going on in the show or program because we're able to read the closed captioning. Same with automatic doors. There are a lot of people who have no disabilities whatsoever who benefit from these types of doors. Now, I also want you to think, with these three images, do you think they were planned right away, or do you think they were perhaps second thoughts? What do I mean by that? The cut curb is a great example. I remember in the town that I grew up in, we had regular curbs. When this initiative was put into place, I remember city workers navigating around my town, creating the cut curbs for handicap purposes. Therefore, these were an afterthought. They were something that was put in to make things more accessible for various groups. With that being said, not all of them looked as great as they should. They worked pretty well, but some of them were left a little to be desired aesthetically. That's what happens in our classroom when we modify instruction as an afterthought. It might work, but it's definitely not usually going to work as well as if we had thought about it and planned for it ahead of time. So when we're thinking about best practices and designing instruction for all students, we can compare it to the design for all in architecture, landscape, and product design. So when we think about architecture, we often see buildings these days that have had wonderful modifications made to them that make them more accessible for all individuals. I've included a video within this slide deck, which you will be able to watch independently as you navigate through this video. Please take time to watch it because it gives a really great example of universal design in architecture. Now, as time went on, some very wise folks in education decided, you know what? What does this have to do with teaching and learning? It seems to really go hand in hand. So they took this idea of universal design in architecture and brought it over to education. Because the reality is, we might have students who are on 504s or have IEPs, but for the most part, at some time throughout the school year, every student in your classroom is going to need some type of accommodation or reteaching in order to be successful with various tasks or learning. So instead of waiting and then trying to backtrack, why don't we begin planning all of our instruction with everybody in mind and anticipating what their needs might be? And this is what was decided and how this universal learning came about. I want you to think about your own classroom right now. How many times has that happened to you where you have gone in, thought you had this great lesson, but realized quickly that you needed to make some modification, seeing quite a difference in student learning and the fact that you're going to feel very prepared as you provide instruction. When they went from architecture to design, you can see some of the similarities. In universal design for architecture, we're talking about a physical environment. For learning, it's the same thing. What does your classroom look like? Do students have access to the resources and materials they're going to need? What do I mean by that? I've walked into teachers' classrooms where they've sent students off to work in small groups, and they've perhaps needed colored pencils. The teacher didn't plan ahead for accommodations, and the colored pencils were up high in the closet, and they weren't able to get to them. This cut into the time the teacher was working with the small group because they had to get up and get them. Or perhaps you have students in your class whose fine motor skills don't allow them to use markers successfully. Maybe instead you're going to provide markers and crayons. This happens with pencils quite often. If we have kids who are holding pencils incorrectly, can we modify and buy some pencil grips to teach them and help them remember to hold a pencil correctly? So very little things can really change the dynamics in your classroom and allow you to meet the needs of all students. We have the physical barriers, right? And we have learning barriers. We don't want to use that one-size-fits-all curriculum. For universal design, we have proactive design of spaces, means that now they're creating buildings that have those revolving doors instead of saying, oh no, we need a revolving door, let's tear this down and put one in. It's the same exact thing in universal design for learning. We need to be proactive in designing our instruction, where we're not going to wait to see if students need some scaffolding, maybe a little modification to a graphic organizer being used. We're going to plan for that. Then we have remodeling or retrofitting can be timely and costly. This is what I referenced earlier, that providing accommodations on the spot or trying to modify lessons when you're in the middle of it can be very overwhelming. But even more importantly, it's definitely not done in a quality manner all the time. Instead, teachers quickly try to change something to meet the needs of different students. So what does effective lesson design look like? Well, we're going to think about three different things. We're going to think about how we're going to provide multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of expression. If we take all three things into consideration every time we're planning, we will be well prepared to meet the needs of all students, not just the ones on 504s or the ones with IEPs. So first we talk about engagement, engaging all students. So ask yourself these questions. How do I give my students choice and autonomy? How do I make learning appropriate to meet the needs and wants of my students? And is my classroom supportive of all students? So Some examples are, do you share your learning goals with your students? I don't know about you, but if I'm going to learn something new, I'm way more apt to be engaged if I know why I'm learning this and I understand what the ultimate goal is. Oftentimes, as teachers, we're very busy and we don't take time to do this. This is something that can be done with students at every grade level, preschool through college. We need to start teaching our students how to set goals and talking about them. Another thing we can do is utilize choice boards. They're a wonderful way to provide some autonomy, structured autonomy, meaning you're giving them choices, but you are still directing them in the right direction to meet their learning goals. The other thing is identifying the interests and needs and strengths of your students. How many of you ask your students, what would you like to learn about? That was a real eye-opener for me. Maybe we can't completely change our curriculum around, but we can definitely add in some extras to make them feel like we are taking into account what they really want to learn about. Here is an example of a couple of choice boards. For example, we have the writing bingo. Maybe we are working on using details and using different adjectives and supporting with more information about the setting or the characters. Some of these could be used instead of just saying they have to write a 5-paragraph essay. What if we allow them to write a letter to an editor describing what the park looks like and how it needs to be refurbished? Maybe they can write a skit or describe a scene. A lot of these things could be used and would give students choices. They would still ultimately be focusing on the same objectives, writing descriptive sentences, but they could do it in a variety of ways, providing choice. You see on the other choice board, this one talks about a Venn diagram where they're comparing and contrasting characters from two stories. I could use a choice board like this in ELA. I might be able to use one in math where I provide problems in all 9 boxes and they have to choose 6 of them. Yes, they're still doing the work, but it is amazing how allowing them to make some choices helps with engagement. The next thing we want to consider is representation. So as a teacher in the classroom, we are on stage. We are often sharing information, knowledge, realia, supporting text with our students. How are we presenting information to meet the needs of all learners? Ask yourself these questions. Are you utilizing text pictures, charts, videos? Are you supporting students who struggle with printed text? And what options do you have for your auditory learners, visual learners, kinesthetic learners? It is very important that you are thinking about all of these different types of media as you plan your lessons. You will have access to this video. It is a great video talking about a mini lesson on setting. Mini lessons are a great way for you to represent information. You can record them or they can be done live. What a mini lesson is, it's a very short, explicit lesson. We don't have our students sitting there for 15, 20 minutes listening to us talk. Instead, we're very purposeful and we only focus on one objective. So some other things that we can do in addition to mini lessons are engaging them with the text. Are they having multiple opportunities to revisit the same text? Then we have our text-to-speech options, audiobooks, partner reading, a variety of different ways. If you focus on this, you are bound to meet the needs of all students. Last, we have action and expression. So how are you allowing your students to express their knowledge? I like to say to show what they know. Well, ask yourself these questions. Do you provide flexible timing and pacing? This one is one of my favorites. Think about this. How often do you provide students with tasks that are not completed with a pencil and paper? This goes for my math teachers, my social studies, my science. How often? If you cannot say at least a minimum of half the time, we are not doing enough to meet the needs of all students. Do my students have access to assistive technology? I'm going to go back up to the flexible timing and pacing. A lot of teachers will say to me, well, Carolyn, I don't have flexibility. I have a pacing guide. I have to get through this. And I understand that. It's not that I'm saying let them go off on their own and take their time and only get one assignment done a semester. I mean, if we're providing a choice board, they know that they have to choose at least 4 of the choices on the choice board. As a teacher, I give them the flexibility and timing. They know they have to do 4. Maybe they go through 3 pretty quickly on the first 2 days of the week because they're interested, but they're not their favorite because they want to save the last 3 days of the week to do one that they're really excited about. That is still allowing them flexibility with timing. So it doesn't have to be something big, great, a 3-ring circus in your classroom, just something that provides them with autonomy. Here's another way to look at it, some product differentiation. Are you providing written, visual, oral, and kinesthetic options? And you can see some of the choices here. So one way to look at this is through perhaps a literature study and tiered assignments. For those of you who aren't familiar with tiered assignments, what you do is you plan ahead of time, as we've been talking about. You focus on one standard or one objective. However, you tier what various students in your class are going to be doing. For example, what does it look like? Here, everybody in the class, everybody in my 4th grade class might be reading the same book. However, they're all going to be responsible for different tasks. And the teacher is going to provide scaffolding while reading the novel whole group. So the reading part might be done orally by the teacher. The students might be listening to it on a recording. However, during small group, maybe some of the students are going to reread. Maybe they're going to do more in-depth discussion or something like this. Students meet with the teacher in a small group to further discuss the reading. And students with moderate comprehension skills are asked to create a story web. So they're already almost proficient. They're asked to create a story web. However, students with advanced comprehension skills, a story web might be too easy. Instead, they're going to be asked to retell that chapter in the book or the story you read from the point of view of the main character instead of maybe third-person point of view. So what's important here is I'm not giving one group of students more work because they're either lower or higher. Instead, I'm choosing activities that are at different levels that require perhaps more inquiry or more higher level thinking. However, we can all be reading the same book. One thing to consider when we are talking about differentiation is depth of knowledge. I know a lot of you are probably familiar with this, but basically when you're thinking about the activities that you are going to utilize to meet the needs of all students, we can look at these 4 levels. So perhaps after reading Frindle, my one group is going to focus on a level 1 activity where they're going to draw a picture of their favorite scene in the chapter, and then they're going to focus on the who, what, when, where, and why, what was happening in that particular chapter. Very straightforward. However, maybe my higher kids are going to do a level 4 extended thinking activity where they are going to analyze what happened in that chapter, and they're going to reflect on if they think it's really something that could happen in real life, and they're going to support their choice or their decision with quotes from the book. So you see I had that word analyze right here under 4. I have draw under 1. You can pause it if you'd like and look at all the different options. These make planning very simple. You can easily create activities that are appropriate for different levels of students. Here's another example. So a DOK1, if we were looking at the DOKs, here, who is your favorite character in the story? Choose 5 words to describe them and draw a picture of the character. So that would be for your students who might not quite be on grade level, might be struggling, very basic understanding. But then 2 would be reflect on the 2 main characters in the story. So more of a compare contrast, which is a higher level DOK, and how are they different? And then 3 might be select quotes or examples from the story that support your description of the main character. So taking it a little further and not just sharing your opinion, but rather providing evidence that support your description of the main character. As you can see, this isn't a lot of extra work for me as the teacher. Yes, it takes some planning, which is key, but all of these students are going to be able to do these activities on a piece of paper. I'm going to be able to call them over, work with them, talk about it, and it's not going to be any extra copies or books that I'm going to have to provide. Here's an example, and you'll have this resource of a tiered lesson plan template. I know that we're not going to do one of these for every single lesson that we're doing. However, as a teacher, I always liked to do one or two as I was getting started with something new. So if I were just starting to do tiered lessons, my planning, the piece for me right up here in my brain, would be writing out what I'm going to do on this lesson plan. I probably won't even look at it when it comes time for this lesson, but it helps me digest the information and plan ahead so I'm prepared to meet the needs of all students. You see that we have this whole group instruction. Then here you write what you want all students to be able to do. So in my last example, it was really, you wanted all students to be able to identify character traits. We were just asking them to do that at a variety of different levels. You were then put in the 3 assignments or modified versions of having them express that they understand right here, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. I hope you will give tiered lessons a try as well. And this goes perfectly also with our instruction and talking about the different representations, how we're going to let them, how we're going to represent the information to them, how we're going to let them express it, how we're going to support engagement. In addition, you are going to be thinking about other ways that you can reduce barriers to learning. So here I'd put down a jot thought. So if you're with a group, you are more than welcome to stop the video at this point. And I would like you to think about what are some of the possible barriers to learning that are going on in your classroom right now, or that you're going to maybe experience as you begin the school year. So Jot Thoughts is a Kagan structure, and what you do is you take little pieces of paper, and on each piece of paper you write one idea. Students really love this structure because it makes them understand how many ideas they have in their brain, because all of those little slips of paper take up a lot of surface area. So yes, it does take paper. However, it can be the back of scratch paper. It does not have to be new shiny paper. So if you'd like to, and you would like to stop and brainstorm possible barriers to learning, go ahead and do that now. Okay, I hope you were able to come up with lots of things that are going through your mind. So hopefully you'll understand that these strategies and techniques and differentiation that we've been talking about can really solve the problem. So effective lessons, they can fix a lot of things, such as small vocabularies, limited reading fluency, number recognition, poor writing skills. When we're focusing on how to meet the needs of all students, these things happen naturally. If you're working with a group and you identified some of those barriers, right now, I would like you to stop the video again. And I would like you to all come together, and I want you to think. Go back in the video if you have to. We know that you want to provide multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of expression. Doing all of these things are going to allow your students to be successful. I want you to look at the barriers you came up with. For example, I've had teachers on their Post-its or their slips of paper write things like, the student is unengaged during an assignment because they are a struggling reader. Okay, if they're not engaged because they're a struggling reader, how could we increase their engagement, right? That would fall, I could solve this and I could decrease this barrier. I could remove this barrier by making sure that I was also providing them with text that they were able to read and comprehend. Maybe I have students who are doing, you can't figure it out. Maybe one of your barriers is that you have so many students who seem to understand the concepts, but they're not doing well on the tests at all. And you realize, I've only been giving paper pencil tests. What if I allow for different means of expression? What if I allow for more projects? Maybe I allow for group projects, oral presentations. Maybe those things will even out the playing field and more students will be able to express just how well they really have grasped the information or the concepts. So if you want to go ahead and stop the video, you can take time to sort those things out. I hope you guys found that a majority, if not all, of your barriers could be solved by focusing on one of those 3 means: engagement, representation, or expression. I want to bring this to life for you. I want you to see what it might feel like to be a student in a class where differentiation is not taking place. The teacher might not be using effective lesson design, and you're going to see what I mean in just a minute. This is actually a great activity you can use with your students. If you're working with younger students, you would just modify this and you would make the menu items maybe something not quite as abstract. However, for this purpose, I think this works great for adults, even middle school, high school. So the directions here say you have been asked to host a dinner party for your neighbors. You will be fixing a 3-course meal with items they have chosen. Put this into perspective as the teacher when you're choosing the way they're going to express their learning, when you're choosing what you're going to engage them in and never asking them. So these are the 3 courses. You see your first course, second course, and third course. You also have access to this sheet if you'd like to pull it up before you stop the video. This will be something that you could talk about with a small group, or even if you're working independently, you can pull it up and take a look. You see that part that I already read, but then down here, there's some things to discuss. For example, part 1, how would you feel about being given this task? What would intimidate you about being asked to prepare this meal? How would you begin prepping to make this meal happen? How would you begin this task after overcoming your barriers? Okay, and then you can go down and look at part 2. What you're going to see is how really considering multiple means of engagement, representation, and expression can completely change a lesson or a task. I know this seems sort of silly, but it really is directly connected to effective lesson planning. What I've asked you to do here is not effective lesson planning. I am asking you to fulfill a task that I have created. I have chosen all the details. I've not provided you with any supporting materials, ideas. I have not said to work collaboratively. So think about all those things. So if you have time, go ahead and stop the video, engage in this activity, and see how it goes. I hope you enjoyed that. If you weren't able to partake in that activity, I suggest printing that off and finding a time maybe at a staff meeting or at a team PLC where you actually walk through this. It allows for excellent conversations about effective lesson planning. It also, as I shared, works great with students to find out what they need. Why would this be less effective than other lessons? You get a lot of great information from your students. What are your takeaways after learning about that activity? If you were able to actually facilitate it and work with others and talk about the process of creating that meal, what are your takeaways? Hope you see the value in effective lesson planning, where we're supporting students through various means of representation, where we are letting them express their learning in a variety of ways, and most importantly, where we're keeping them engaged, where we're making them understand the value of what they're learning. Your next step is going to be to think about effective lesson design and your mindset right now. I have created a document that will allow you to write down your current ideas in regard to lesson planning, and then to reevaluate them and to see what tweaks you could make to better meet the needs of all students in the classroom. To end our session, we're going to look at this quote by Gandhi. Sometimes it's hard to change things we've been doing for a very long time, but it's definitely possible. And it is so valuable when we're trying to meet the needs of students and learners at a variety of different levels. This quote states, your beliefs become your thoughts become your words become your actions become your habits become your values become your destiny. Isn't that true? You can be the change. You can be the one who changes your thoughts and begins to plan to meet the needs of all students. Think about what you're taking away, head back to those classrooms and give it a try. Thank you so much for joining me.